Stay up in the night and in the morning I'ma rise for it. Heart for it, mind for it, ears for it, eyes for it. Peace and a place on this earth for me and mine for it. Work for it, strive for it, I'ma organize for it. Stay up in the night and in the morning I'ma rise for it. Heart for it, mind for it, ears for it, eyes for it. Peace and a place on this earth for me and mine for it.
Hey, welcome to the Money, Power, Land Solidarity Podcast. We're sitting out here today on a beautiful Wednesday morning in Powderhorn Park, and I'm honored to be with a special guest today, Rafael Gonzalez, maybe better known to folks as Tufawon. Hey, so I just want to first start out, can you tell us a bit about yourself, your work in Minneapolis and beyond as a musician, an artist, an activist, an organizer, and more?
Yeah, for sure. I'm from Minneapolis, born and raised, South Side. I was born at Riverside Hospital, very close in close proximity to the river. I'm a Dakota Boricua. I come from a mixed heritage. Hip-hop artist, producer, musician, culture bearer, activist. And I've been doing hip-hop for quite some time now. I'm 33 years old, and I started off in a hip-hop group called the Luminous 3, which is like a South Side hip-hop, real gritty hip-hop crew.
Legends.
You know, like we started in high school, so I've been doing this for like, I don't know, maybe 16 or 17 years, maybe longer. I don't know. We've been releasing like mixtapes and music for quite some time, and then eventually, started adding on my solo music with that, and releasing projects. So I've been actively doing hip hop, especially on a local level for quite some time, and then eventually started to branch out and started seeing the world and going to different places like Cuba. I've been there many times, doing a lot of artist collaboration with Cuban artists, Puerto Rico, and then my background is youth work, and that's a form of activism within itself, you know what I'm saying? And so I was at the White House Community Center through Pillsbury United Communities, working with youth, doing mostly civic engagement and service learning projects, and then a whole list of other projects that I included. I did a lot of music programming. I brought in bomba. I also play bomba, which is traditional Puerto Rican music that was created approximately 500 years ago on the rum plantations of Puerto Rico, enslaved Africans, blended in with the indigenous and Spanish, and created this art form. So I've been practicing that for at least 7 years now. And then eventually I moved on from youth work for a while, and I continued on doing music full time, and really focusing in on my music career. And then I heard about what was happening with the oil fossil fuel industry and this whole crisis that's happening, and I mainly heard it through Standing Rock. I kept seeing all of this, information of especially the youth. It was really the youth that I heard first with these videos, and them saying and speaking on the issue and saying, hey, we don't want our water to be contaminated by this pipeline. So it was a Energy Transfer Partners Corporation in partnership with Enbridge Corporation. Basically, they got together and decided that they wanted to build this massive pipeline that runs through Dakota, Lakota, Nakota Treaty Territory, which is land that we have rights to according to the United States Constitution. And they wanted to put this pipeline to run crude oil from the Bakken oil fields of North Dakota to Illinois. And basically that was like my calling. into activism, I guess. I haven't really been using that word as much because a lot of my friends are like, "Yo, that's kind of like a colonized word. Just be a good person." You know what I'm saying? And I'm like, you know, just be a fucking human, right?
Yeah.
Oh, can we cuss on this?
Yes,
We can?
please.
Okay. Just had to make sure. Yeah, and so yeah, just being a good person and being compassionate about your community and about the land and about, you know, the people who came before us who really took care of this land in order for us to live and thrive and still be here, you know. And so there was a very spiritual connection and calling to be in Minneapolis, which is Dakota territory, yet to be so disconnected from my own ways because of colonization. You know, Standing Rock was a way for me to get reconnected, because after the Dakota War of 1862 and my people were exiled, a lot of our traditions and our ways were gone. You know what I mean? It was illegal for, you know, I think it might still be, I have to double check this, but I think it still might be written in law that it's illegal to be Dakota in Minnesota.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And, you know, obviously that's like not an active like law, but the fact that those kinds of things are like still there it just shows you like the you know, it's just an example of the nastiness of this colonization, you know? And so I felt like a spiritual pull to go out and be with my people, because my people were pushed out into the Dakotas, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska. A lot of my relatives fled up to Canada, to Manitoba, after the war, to seek asylum. You know, there were refugees, so there's a lot of my people that are up there, like my relatives and whatnot. And so yeah, we got pushed and moved all over the place, and so our traditions and our ceremonies, at least from my knowledge, are stronger on the res. They're stronger on the reservation. They're stronger back home, you know. And so I have a lot of people out there, and that's where I'm enrolled. You know, I'm enrolled Spirit Lake, North Dakota, and most of my family, they're from Siston and Manitoba, Siston, South Dakota. And like I said, there was this spiritual pull, because I was, you know, my mom went to boarding school. She's from the boarding school era, and she lived through the assimilation, you know. So after like this mass like killing and genocide of the Dakota people and indigenous people across Turtle Island, you know, there was the cultural genocide that happened after that too. So our ceremonies were made illegal. Like we weren't legally able to pray up until I think 1978.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like we couldn't practice our own spirituality, and so we had to go underground with it. You know what I mean? Like a lot of our powwows, actually, people, you know, like I go back home to Siston, South Dakota, where my family's from, and I go back and I see this 4th of July powwow and seeing all of this like American flag and veterans and all of that, and I'm like, it kind of makes me sick, because I don't really subscribe to that flag. That flag doesn't represent me, and that's not my flag.
Yeah.
Right? And I see that, and I see such irony. And then I was talking to a friend of mine, and he was like, yeah, like this is the 4th of July powwow, but understand that this particular powwow is even more important, because this was used as a way to disguise our ceremonies. And so when the colonizers would come in and be like, hey, what are you guys doing? We'd start dancing around and pretending like this was the powwow. And the powwow is just like the dance. It's the celebration. It's the gathering where indigenous people come together and put their regalia on and showcase our dancing and singing skills. And it's the social place, right?
Yeah.
But really, we were using that powwow as a way to hide and pretend. It was a way to hide, pretend like we're dancing, when really we were practicing our ceremonies and our sun dances on the low. So we had to go underground with our language. Like my ancestors, like, you know, they could have gotten their tongues cut out for speaking Dakota, so they had to speak it on the low, you know, so they sacrificed so much. And so I felt like this pull to get out there and do something for my people because I've been so disconnected, you know, like there wasn't only just like this responsibility that I have as a person to finally do something about helping fight against climate change. It's such a popular topic right now. Like a lot of people talk about it, you know what I mean? And I've talked about it and I'm like, yeah, I want to do something. So I hear words thrown around like green and sustainable and you know, not having this like lessening the carbon footprint and all of those things, you know what I mean? And people sit around and in meeting rooms and they talk about these things, you know what I mean? And then go out and do soft actions or don't even do shit. They might write a think piece or whatever it is, you know? And
buy a compostable fork or some shit.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, and some people do, don't get me wrong. There's people out here that are fighting too. Shout outs to all the people that are like doing their thing and trying, you know? But not only just that, I need to hold myself accountable to these things that I talk about when it comes to the topic of climate change and actually helping the land and the earth, but also, that spiritual pull. So my ancestors were speaking to me, you know, and that's when I went into my first sweat lodge, you know, and that's when I had...
At Standing Rock?
Standing Rock was the first time I actually went into a sweat lodge.
Yeah.
And that's how disconnected I was, you know what I'm saying? And so I felt my ancestors, I felt my grandma, I felt our ways saying, hey, we've been waiting for you, you know, this whole entire time, you know, and it was really, you know, obviously like I was like super emotional, but ever since then and that point, that's when it was clear to me that this is my calling, that, you know, like hip-hop has been here the whole time, you know, and I've been trying to use it as, you know, this vehicle for social change, you know, to affect the change that I want to see in the world. But at the same time, I have this other fight, you know, so there's like youth work, there's hip-hop, and then this new fight that I was so new to and kind of still sort of new to. I mean, it's only been a couple years. It's been like 2.5, maybe 3 years, I don't know. And so from there, you know, I just kind of took off with it, you know, and I wasn't expecting anything out of Standing Rock. Like I was expecting to go and stand with my people, and I did exactly that. You know, like I went and I got hurt, you know, and...
Can you talk a little bit about what the conditions were like up there? Like, you know, I didn't go up. I seen photos, but y'all really facing extreme repression and extreme natural elements. Could you give people a window into like what was it actually like being on the ground up there?
Yeah, totally. And so as far as the reservations go, like so many indigenous communities were forced onto reservations, and that's our land, but also it's in most cases reservations are strategically placed in very isolated parts of the country, and that's like a intentional like plan to keep us here to keep our people here in these really remote places that are in the middle of nowhere in very rural areas. So in Standing Rock, it was like, I'm coming from the city, right? And I'm coming in and I'm driving out there, and you pass through Bismarck, which is like really white, and then you go into the res, and it's like open plains, you know. It's actually quite beautiful, but you go down there, and you know, we were at this camp, and there was 2 camps. The initial camp was on the Standing Rock side in a place called Cannonball, North Dakota, and across the river was off the reservation, and that was quote unquote our Army Corps of Engineers land, and the initial camp that was started by LaDonna Allard on her land, shout outs to her because she's an amazing person who helped lead that movement. Really, the Standing Rock movement was led by indigenous women and indigenous youth.
Amen.
You know what I'm saying? Like that, like whenever I talk about that, like I have to make sure to acknowledge
Real
that,
shit.
you know?
Real shit.
And so, but the crossover from the Standing Rock side, which was on the reservation, was Army Corps of Engineers claimed this land on the other side of the river, and that's where the Spillover Camp happened, and that's where the big camp kind of just like grew. At one point, it was exponential. It was like the camp didn't look the same.
Like you could
yesterday.
see, as far as you could look, it was
huge.
Structures, tents, and people coming to show support, and
giant domes and all kinds of structures and like car garages and all kinds of.
And y'all are up there in the open plains in North Dakota in the winter. What was that like?
That was tough. It was. So when I first started going out there, it was in August of 2016, shit. And I was going back and forth because I was like, at that time, like I said, I was trying to do my music thing. I wasn't doing youth work anymore. I had just put out two albums that year, and I was like living. I was at the point where I'm like, dang, I'm living off of my art right now, and I'm like actually making this happen. I'm making enough from CD sales, digital sales, making enough from my music to like actually do this. And then that calling happened, and then I went out there and I was like, how can I support what's going on at out in Standing Rock and at this No Dapple camp? How could I support while I'm doing this music at the same time? There's always been this struggle, and I still kind of struggle with that too, you know. And so what I was doing is I was doing these big donation runs. So I was going out there for like a week, 2 weeks at a time, coming back home and just going back and forth.
Loading up with stuff.
Yep.
Bringing it up there.
Up until it got really cold. And when it got really cold is when like most of the people dipped. And I was like, dang, I really need to be here. And that's when I stayed. And so the wintertime, so on this piece of land, on the Spillover Camp, that is actually technically Fort Laramie Treaty territory. So we still have rights to that land, even though the Army Corps of Engineers claim that land. That is actually Oceti Sakowin, the 7 Council Fires, the land that belongs to the Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota people. And if you look at it on a map, it's like a big chunk of land. I think there's even parts of Wyoming that are on that, North and South Dakota. It's a huge piece of land, and that was settled through the treaties because the United States, at some point, they're like, we can't fight these wars anymore. You know what I mean? Too many people were dying on their side because, you know, we defeated the United States in battle on, you know, at different occasions, and then eventually they killed off our food supply, and I could go way into it, but and so we remained on the land, and we're like, all right, this is the stronghold. We're gonna stay on this land. We're gonna be here, and we're not going anywhere. And there was conflict because the Standing Rock tribal government and the rest of the people, there's the people of Standing Rock, and then the people of the Oceti Sakowin or the, you know, the Dakota, Lakota, Nakota people, who were like, hey, we want to stay here and we want to hold this down. And this is the front line. This is the resistance, right? And they were like, it's too dangerous and we need to clear the camp. And so Standing Rock, you know, they were there. Dave Archambault, who was at the time, he was the chairman of the Standing Rock tribe. And he was pushing for the closing of the camp. So there was like internal conflict happening. Between
like the leadership of like that reservation and that community, and then the broader movement and the broader people.
Yep, exactly. And so, and the thing is like there are so many people that depend on the Missouri River for drinking water and more than one reservation. And so they kind of took like the spotlight, and it was like, wait, Cheyenne River is just south and they depend on it just as much. You know what I mean? Standing Rock alone, the reservation population is about 8,000 people. 18 million people depend on that drinking water. And so me as a Dakota person, and many other you know, people who are from the Oceti Sakowin, we're looking at Standing Rock like, why are y'all calling the shots here? You know what I'm saying? Why is, you know, and so there was conflict. I could go way
That's
into
deep.
that, you know what
That's
I'm
really
saying?
deep,
But
yeah.
there was conflict, and so, you know, remaining on the land during the winter time was during that time when Standing Rock was telling everybody to go home. And so there was not only struggle with being there in the cold, but there was also the struggle of being there and having to deal with the mess with the internal conflicts. And it's like, how are we gonna, like, we have to deal with the conflict internally. This is distracting us from actually focusing on the pipeline fight right now. You know what I mean? And so there was that. So that was like what it was like in the winter. But as far as like being there in like the terrain, I mean, literally, I mean, there were cars that were like on the side of the road for like months at a time because they just like wiped out and flipped over, and like, you know, the conditions, like that was like the worst winter in a really long time.
I remember praying for y'all here in the city and just honestly not being able to imagine, because it's like in the city you have like structures around you. I mean, people die from the cold in the city too, but it was so cold that winter where I was that thinking about y'all out there on top of that with the U.S. military bearing down on you is like, I don't even have a word to describe like the courage, you know, and just like, that was a life-changing moment for a lot of people. I think even for those of us who didn't experience it directly, you know, and it's just like, for lack of a better word, all I can say is salute. You know what I'm saying? It's
I
just
appreciate it. Yeah, man. Like the conditions out there, like at one point I was living in tents, and that was like cool because it was warm. And then eventually it was like, all right, we got to figure something out. And so, you know, people were putting wood stoves inside of teepees, and at one point I just remembered like during the coldest time, like when all the veterans came out and they did their thing or whatever, like there was like, it was like negative temperatures, the snow was like blowing sideways, and like there were times where like people didn't even have to go out and do actions because the weather was so bad, and they couldn't even work on construction. So
Yeah.
it was like a blessing sort of when it was really, really cold, but at the same time it was like during those days there was a time where I was like, I think it was like a week and a half where it was just super cold in December, and they weren't actively working on construction as much because the severe weather conditions. And it was like the main thing that we were really focusing on was keeping that fire lit and keeping wood in the teepee to make sure that like we didn't freeze.
Yeah.
And that was like it, you know. And there was certain camps that were there that probably actively engaged the most in the most effective actions out there. And they were kind of like ridiculed and like thrown under the bus. And like, you know, Standing Rock really wanted to take the prayer position, and we wanted to take the prayer, you know, we wanted to take the prayer position, but also the direct action position, because it's like every single strategy, if we want to see, and this goes for any movement, it's like whatever strategy there is, we need to hit it from every angle. So if there's people working through the process of litigation to sue for you know, violating our treaty rights, running this pipeline through, they need to be in the courts working on that. People in the political system, people in the you know, doing nonviolent direct action, people who are doing ceremony and running prayer, the youth, every single aspect, you know, like has to be covered. Amen. You know, in order to see this actually happen and change. And so we were like, we're not trying to stop anyone from praying, you know, like we're not trying to stop anybody from doing that. We're in prayer, but we want to follow our prayers with actions. You know, and you know, like I said, you know, like Dave Archambault and the Standing Rock, they like, you know, I should say the Standing Rock Tribal Council and the Standing Rock government, because there were many people from Standing Rock that stood their ground and held it down. You know what I'm saying? because and that's what it was like. There was a mix, but anyway, yeah. So the terrain, and it was tough. It was really tough to be out there, and especially like going out and being at these actions allegedly. So like, yeah, when you ask me about like the conditions, and not only was it super cold, but like the police repression every day, it was okay. So you see the images of like being on that bridge, and they put a blockade on that bridge, and the National Guard is there, and you can't cross this bridge because they're saying that the bridge is structurally like unfit, making some excuses to keep a blockade on that bridge, when really on the other side of that bridge is where the pipeline route is. You know what I'm saying? So they're trying to block us off in certain parts of the highway. At one point there was military checkpoints. Imagine being on your own land, right? And pulling up, and you have to stop your car so they could search you whenever they feel like.
Some big redneck with a chopper.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like dude, like hella fucking like militarized weaponry, and you're seeing these tanks roll around and things like that, and you're like, what world are we living in right now? You know what I'm saying? Prior to that, when it was warmer, I think in was it October? Like people were private security, in the private security mercenaries, they did whatever the fuck they wanted to do, you know what I mean? And you had people getting bit up by dogs, and then you saw in the wintertime, you saw water cannons being sprayed at people, and you're like, man, this is flashbacks to a time that wasn't so long ago, and I thought we got over this, right? Yeah. And it's just happening in indigenous communities, right? And so we're fighting the common cause here. And like there were nights where the police came out in full force when we were trying, like water protectors occupying that bridge and trying to clear it and say, hey, like this is our land, we have rights to this land. And then the North Dakota police, in cooperation with the National Guard and private security mercenaries who actually didn't have permits to run security in North Dakota. They never got permits, so they're actually illegally tiger swan. Look up tiger swan.
Yo, I've heard a little bit, and that's not a joke.
Yeah.
Real paramilitary fascist shit. Oh yeah,
for sure. They got some wild, like, fucked up training, and they inflicted violence upon us, and they come out and they're hitting people with rubber bullets, they're hitting people with these full canisters. Like, I left with permanent tissue damage on my leg, you know what I'm saying, from getting hit, tear gas all throughout the thing, you know what I'm saying? Like it was bad. One woman, she was a white ally, and she came through, she got a flash grenade thrown at her, and she got her whole arm blown open. It was completely exposed, and now she has a permanent scar. You know what I mean? A couple people lost an eye, like that type of police repression. I mean, if you're spraying water cannons at people in sub-freezing weather, there's the chance of hypothermia.
That's lethal,
you know what I'm
force.
saying?
Yeah, active war.
Yeah, totally. Somebody could die. So they're like they were literally trying to kill people that night, and I wasn't there for that particular one. I was at many other actions, but that was the one action when I was back at home. I had to play a show or something, and I was back at home, and I'm like, you know what? I need to go back, and I need to stay.
Yeah.
I need to go back, and I need to be there for good, because this ain't right. And that's when I put my music on hold. That was when I was like, I have to put my whole career. And like I said, I was doing all right. I was getting to a place where I was like building my brand and my business and living off of the music, and that's the dream, right? Yeah. And like, yeah, at that point I'm like, this is too severe. I really gotta put this on hold, And so for me, it was necessary for me to be out there. I'm like, there were there were all kinds of people on that front line, you know what I mean? And I'm like, hey, I got hit, I got shot up, but at least the elder didn't.
Real shit.
At least a youth didn't.
Honestly, it's like really inspiring to see. I feel like, you know, I'm an MC too, and I feel like in Minneapolis, or just, I heard you say the word culture bearer, and the idea that like to actually take the action to make your words real and to live in, like, to know that it's beyond just being nice on the mic and being able to write poetry, but as a whole human being to show up like that, that's really inspiring. I feel like that's the ideal as an artist, you know, especially like from there's like, I'm not trying to be too critical, but there's people who do it in a corny way or try to just talk about politics or whatever, but then they don't show up, you know, right, exactly. But it's like, were you out there on the front lines really doing it?
Oh my God, I saw that. You know what I'm saying? Like, I saw that there were literally people who came in, even native rappers, and it was so corny to me that like you're gonna come in, shoot your music video, take your selfies on the front line real quick, and then you're nowhere to be found after that. You go and edit your shit, you put it out, and then you get thousands and millions of streams or whatever, you know what I'm saying, for your own personal platform, but you're not out here actually putting in the work to actively try to stop this thing, you know what I mean?
Not a good look.
Like, for real, there were some vultures out there, and like to me that is the perfect word, corny. That shit was so corny to me that people would go out there, and it was like, man, I tried not to get distracted by it because it bothered me, you know what I mean? It bothered us, you know, me and my crew. And so when I was out there, we were like, man, I just so happened to get with a crew of native hip-hop artists that were super dope, that were also like, we're putting our careers on hold for this. And it was like, dang, after we got pushed off the land and they forcibly removed us off of the land, in cooperation with the National Guard and North Dakota Police, security mercenaries, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. After they pushed us off that land, it was like, what do we got to do now? We have like, okay, we didn't stop this pipeline. Standing Rock threw in the towel. We're hella depressed and got all these new levels of trauma. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, where do we go from here, you know? And so during the time, you know, like we would make trips here and there, like outside of camp, and we would do this these divestment actions because we were trying to put emphasis on the fact that big banks and these major financial institutions were the ones that were funding the pipeline projects. Wells Fargo and U.S. Bank and Chase and all kinds of European banks. They were all like empowering that by bringing capital to these projects. And it's like, okay, we need to, you know, hold y'all accountable for the destruction that you're funding, you know, trying to act like you're some kind of wholesome bank, you know what I mean? What? Are you kidding me? So after we left Standing Rock, we were like, you know, what do? We took a little break for a couple weeks, and we did some healing. We went to ceremony, you know, and after that, we were like, let's hit the road and let's go tour, you know, and I had no intention of ever. I was actually gonna quit rap. I was gonna quit rap music, and I had no intention of ever doing anything music related with this fight. But suddenly this intersection between the fight and hip hop blended together, and I noticed that wherever you go, if there's marginalized people, you're likely gonna hear hip hop. You know? At least on Turtle Island, and you know what I'm saying? And so when you go to native communities, hip hop is banging. You know what I'm saying? Like hip hop is that's what people listen to, you know? We have our traditional music and especially the youth, you know what I mean? Hip hop is being played, and so that was like a natural thing that happened. And then I linked up with Natani and Anton Edwards and like just a whole crew of like JOC, Wheatco, like this whole crew of like really dope hip-hop artists who I just so happened to be in a frontline crew with. We lived in a yurt together. Hey, I went from one setup, I was living in the teepee, that shit was cold as hell, to a yurt. It was such an improvement,
Stepped
yo.
up.
I stepped it up, bro, and we had just such a sacred and beautiful like experience, man. Like
That's powerful.
I miss that so much, yo. Like being there with them and sharing that experience is this thing that's only gonna happen, you know, this way.
Yeah.
Once.
I feel you.
You can't never replace that ever, you know. And so we went on tour, we continued with the divestment movement, and next thing you know, all of these opportunities just start to present themselves to me. You know what I mean? It was like, oh, we worked for this first tour, the Wake Up the World tour. We're like, hey, let's put our heads together and let's work on it.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, we're getting hit up. Natani's like, yo, bro, I got an opportunity for us, man. We going to Europe, bro. And I'm like, oh shit, are you serious? He's like, yeah. He's like, it's a divestment tour, but they're hitting me up talking about, we know y'all rap, so we're gonna book concerts throughout the whole thing too.
That's dope. That's powerful.
I went from sitting in a teepee questioning my whole rap career and be like, I'm probably gonna quit this and this is what I'm gonna be doing. I'm gonna be at these resistance camps.
Right.
Right?
Hell yeah.
To being in front of 4,000 people in Bologna, Italy, performing, you know what I'm saying? It was nuts. It was wild to see that. And so, you know, I had to float. I was just floating and I was like, whatever comes my way, I'm cool with it. But it was, so you know how like that calling was there for me to go and to fight and defend Standing Rock and defend the Ocheti Shakoan and defend our water and the planet and our people. This other calling was also there saying, yo, they're the same thing. Yo, what you doing?
Absolutely.
Like hip-hop is the way you can speak to the youth. The hip-hop is the way that's the language you can use to communicate all that you've been fighting. You know what I mean? It's not just getting on the megaphone and doing, you know, call and response. You got the microphone and you doing call and response too on a stage. You know what I'm saying? And so I was like, oh shit, like there's no difference here.
Hell
you know what I mean? Like,
hell yeah, warrior poet. It's just another tool. That's real.
That's what I'm saying, you know?
I wanted to focus in a little bit bring us back to Minneapolis. And one thing just to name, I feel like you already spoke on the connection. So next to this Upper Harbor Terminal redevelopment site over north off in between the Lowry and Camden Bridge on the Mississippi River, there's the GAF shingles factory, sits right next to the land that's supposed to be redeveloped. So they don't have any plans on closing it. But what I've learned doing the research is that is also a part of this toxic petrochemical process. So they get oil byproduct from the coke oil refinery, move it through pipelines or whatever, and it goes to this shingles factory, and they make asphalt shingles in this factory over north that, you know, it's been tied to asthma and cancer in north and northeast in those working class neighborhoods. And I was just curious about like if you could say anything more about the connection between kind of like the urban and rural sites of like pollution and destruction and oppression. You know, like you said, they tuck indigenous folks away, you know, and move the reservation so people don't see them and try to cause division and separation. Do you have any thoughts on how like the lessons you learned as a water protector relate in this urban context and ways to draw those connections between sites of urban pollution and sites of rural pollution?
Yeah, totally. I mean, when it comes down to it, this is all native land. You know what I'm saying? Like I said, Minneapolis, we're in Dakota territory, you know, and like when I see you just see more of it here, there's more of the toxic industry that's here because it's in such a condensed kind of space, right? And so with the factory that you're talking about, you know, the way it relates is that this is an example of environmental racism because you have these different places that are placed directly in communities that are marginalized, and that's how it affects their air. And so when you bring it back to Standing Rock, initially that project was supposed to go through Bismarck, North Dakota, in a predominantly white community, and so they voted against it and moved it further south onto treaty territory, and so because they said that it would be too dangerous and it would could potentially pollute their water. And all they had to do was vote, and they, boom, canceled.
And then it just gets shoved down.
Rerouted and shoved down, right? And so I don't know that the history with the shingles factory, but what I can tell you is that, you know, Black communities have been there. You know what I'm saying? And they've been there, and they were there for a hot minute, and still are, and holding down the north side and living and thriving and struggling and everything. You know what I'm saying? But they put these there in those positions because they know it's not gonna, like when you see in white communities, you know what I'm saying, you're not gonna see that, you know?
Yeah.
You see an incinerator in by where the Savers was at on Lake Street, that's in the Phillips, that's an incinerator.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
They put these in, so these are all examples and why they tie together and why they're similar and why they're the same thing is that these are all clear examples of environmental injustice and environmental racism.
Hell yeah. One thing I've noticed is in the last couple of years in like local politics, like I'll show up to meetings and you get some folks now who will start an event and say, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on stolen Dakota land. And I feel like that's a positive thing, you know, as far as like at least a step towards acknowledging the truth of what happened here. But then nothing happens after that. It's kind of like, hey, we acknowledged it and then we're just going to continue to go on about our business. What do you think would be the appropriate next steps? You know, they're talking about redeveloping this land on the Mississippi River over north. If someone was to say like, okay, let's acknowledge we're on stolen Dakota land, what are some good next steps? Like, how do you make good on acknowledging that, and what could be like some steps towards decolonization? I
mean, just like adding us into the wordage of the plan even would be like, even okay, so you have people who are fighting it, and shout outs to the people who have been fighting it. You know, what's the name of that group that's been
the cocreation team?
Cocreation. Yep. Shout outs to them. I just haven't heard, like, I want to hear more people say and acknowledge on both sides, you know, even though they're doing great work, you know what I'm saying? Shout outs to them. And but I want to hear more language from both sides saying this land that people are trying to develop and fighting over actually belongs to the first people. You know what I mean? Yeah. And at the very least, if they can begin to just put that in the language of like, yeah, we acknowledge that this is Dakota land, and if there could be some type of way to bring that in, I think that the people who are building it, which is like, isn't it the Minneapolis Park and Rec? And
there's the development team right now is the city, quote unquote, owns the land,
right?
The city of Minneapolis, and then the park board is a partner on it, and then they're working with United Properties, which is the Polad family. You know, one of the richest families in the nation, like billion-dollar family. They own the Minnesota Twins. They own Go 95. They own tons of stuff.
And then First Avenue. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. And so like the park board, I've noticed that they're actually making an attempt to restore some of the original Dakota names, right?
Yeah.
And there was the fight, and they supported us in the name change of Bede Makaska, and that, you know, like totally, for me, that was like a way for us to like reclaim, right? Like reclaim the space and be like, look, we're saying that this is all of ours to share, but we're also trying to denounce white supremacy, right? Somebody who was like who would, you know, uphold slavery and you know, genocide and displacement of indigenous people and all of that, you know. We're trying to denounce that right now, and then the park board is like, yeah, we're gonna support that, you know. And so I think there could be room for that with this particular project. I would be open to sitting and meeting with some people and being like, hey, like, can we like actually look up the original name of these spaces?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And can we put that into this plan? You know,
Yeah.
Can we add that into this plan? Because I know it's, you know, and I think this is an opportunity for indigenous and Northsiders and the Black community of the North Side specifically to build solidarity.
I wanted to ask you about that. Like, I've always known you to be a very proud Southsider, you know, and I'm from Northeast Minneapolis, so I have a particular relationship to the North Side.
Yep, very close.
What's it been like for you as far as, like, what role has North Minneapolis played in your life? Do you have any thoughts on the relationship between the South Side and North Side, indigenous folks and Black folks, and how to move towards solidarity?
Yeah, I feel like it's such a small city, but at the same time, it's very segregated. And you look at the city mapping of how originally the North Side was created to be sectioned off from the rest of the city. I feel like it's kind of like that in St. Paul too, with the East Side. Like there's like sections, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's been such a separation, and in order to see more solidarity and unification between both sides, it has to come down to the people, because the structure of it was totally created and designed in a way to keep things separate. You know what I mean? And so it has to come down to us. So, you know, so I see people like, I'll give an example like Jordan Hamilton, for example, who was a proud Southsider as well. We actually lived together in the same house. You know, he works at Juxtaposition Arts, you know what I'm saying? And I'm like, okay, that's an example of how to bring Southside energy and be a part of the North Side at the same time. Yeah. And so I think working on projects, whether it's on an artistic level, on a community level, you know, on an educational level, there needs to be more like cross collaboration happening, and there is some. Don't get me wrong. There's definitely some happening. I'd like to see more. My connection to the North Side, I went to Summit Academy for vocational school. That was pretty dope. Okay. Yeah. So I went to school on the North Side for a little bit. Over north. Yeah, it was cool. It was real cool, dope. And I made some friends out there, and you know, it's right there. And then another thing is, like, I was thinking about the question. I'm like, you know, North Side and South Side and East Side and Northeast and all these different sides, like, there is a time where we should be very proud, right? Because I know you're proud to be Northeast, you know what I'm saying? Because Northeast is so dope. I love Northeast, right? Even though it's also going through this gentrification. Everywhere is.
That's my next question for you.
Right?
Yep. Yeah.
Right? But like, also at the same time to understand that, like, my DNA is connected to all of this land. Shit. You know what I'm saying? So like, when I go to the North Side, there's times when I'm like, I'm not looking at it like the North Side. Or when I go to Northeast, or when I go to Southeast, or I go to St. Paul, like, if I go to St. Paul and I'm on Wabasha is named after one of our chiefs. You know, I'm Midewakatuan Dakota, Midewakaton Dakota, right? And that's one of the bands of the Dakota and the Ocheti Shakoan, so there's many bands within, right? And that's my particular band. Okay. You know what I mean? And like, these are the names of my actual ancestors in places like St. Paul. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Minnetonka, all these different places, and I'm like, you know, like, I think there's a time and a place for us to be super proud, you know, of our sides, because that's our neighborhoods and that's where we grew up, you know what I'm saying? And then there's also a time to just recognize that this is all the same. Man, real shit. This is all the same thing. There's no difference between North Side and South Side in another way. That's like a colonizer's frame that they put over it. Because the thing is those borders were created, you know what I'm saying? The South Side border was created, the North Side border, and for the North Side to be so sectioned off, that was all created, and it wasn't designed by us. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And so like, yes, be proud to be a South Sider. Yes, be proud to be a Northeaster, or, you know, a North Sider. You know what I'm saying? St. Paul, East Side, West Side. Shout outs to all of the sides. Be as proud as you want to be. But then at the same time, like, let's be together as people on this same body of land, because those boundaries are all constructs. You know what I'm saying? Really well said. That's dope. I got two quick questions for you. Could you say a little bit, you kind of mentioned gentrification, like,
What's your thoughts on gentrification in Minneapolis? How are you seeing it show up, and what's it feel like to you when you encounter gentrification?
I mean, you're seeing it in so many different ways, in so many different forms. As far as the Upper Harbor Terminal, when I looked at the plan, just to talk a little bit more about that and how that relates to gentrification, when I originally looked at the plan, it was like, oh, this is kind of cool, but I feel weird.
Yeah.
Like, there's something dystopic about it. Like, there's something that feels wrong about it. And then I looked into the plan a little bit further, and then I looked into like the fight and the active resistance against it, and how the original plan didn't involve the people of the North Side, and how that just completely shut out an entire population of people who have been marginalized and who have already been gentrified by like previous developments from that space. I mean, hundreds of houses that got demolished, and that, you know, like the black community of the North Side didn't have, you know, a choice, and they were displaced. You know, that's colonization over and over again. You know what I mean? That's more colonization that's continuing. When people, a lot of times people think of colonization as something that's old and that happened long ago. And it's like, no, this is a continuation, and it's the same thing that's still happening. Maybe it's new, and maybe people have smartphones, and maybe people have solar panels and things like that, you know what I mean? But it's still the displacement of people, right?
And like the pulling of resources out and up towards like the wealthy and white, rather than like a communal collective. Yeah. Totally.
So my mom's house is being like, you know, my mom lives in Longfellow, so I kind of grew up between Longfellow, Phillips, and Seward, right? And my mom's house is in Longfellow, right over by the grain elevators off of Hiawatha.
Okay.
Right? And that is an area that is becoming more and more gentrified. You see they just tore down that house on 46th in Minnehaha. There was a yellow house, right? And my grandma used to live in that house, and there was a thrift store right next to it. It was called a Pink Closet for a really long time, right? And that corner just got knocked down, and they're about to put up some new fancy apartments that nobody can afford, right? And so you see that happening all over the place, and it's like, dang, like, cool, like, wipe my memory away, you know what I'm saying? Like,
it's a traumatic thing. It's like I've been going through that tour. I realized, like, I show up over Northeast, and all of a sudden it's like a whole block that I have like blood, sweat, and tears on. It's just completely remade, and I wasn't consulted. And all of a sudden it's like new suburban white people showing up, and it's like, I feel you. It's a hard thing. For the sake of time, I just want to ask a closing question, and ask, what does the Mississippi River mean to you? Being
like
a Dakota person, and also being from Minneapolis, you know, like what's the Mississippi River mean to you?
For me, like the river is, to go right back to the beginning of the conversation, like I was born Fairview Riverside Hospital right there on Riverside Avenue, you know what I'm saying? So I was born in like very, very close prox. I was brought into this world right next to the Mississippi River.
That's where I was born too.
You know, right?
Hell yeah.
Hey, we were brought into the world.
Right. I'm 33 too. We were probably right there.
Hey, my dude. When's your birthday?
October 10th.
October 10th, December 22nd. So
nice.
We're like, okay.
Not far.
We're like super close,
Hell
right?
Yeah.
But the river is, you know, this is the biggest river, and isn't it like it's the biggest river in North America, so-called North America. To me, when you have a body of water like that, and when we say Minnewachuny, we say water is sacred, this is a because of its current and those strong currents, this is a continual flow of sacred energy that continues to come into the city, right? And come into the area, you know? And so I don't think people really have a full understanding of why that is. And now we talk about the problems of Minneapolis because they exist and they need to be addressed. But then there's also that level of sacredness that exists here with our arts community and with the you know, POC or with marginalized groups or with whoever, you know what I'm saying, with refugee populations or whoever it might be, you know what I'm saying, and where you find community and you find beauty and you find love and joy. A lot of that is connected to that river.
Hell yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Hell yeah.
And so we can't be out here blocking people off from it. You know what I'm saying? That's why it's so important. Man, when I go down the river all the time, yo. Like I go down there, I was just filming some footage down there. I go down there and I pray and I sing my songs and I pay respect, you know, and acknowledge how much life that river gives.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's so sacred, you know? And so when you section people off and you block people away from that, you're keeping them from that sacredness. So when they're building this project, if they don't build this project and allow people, especially marginalized people, to be a part of that, you know what I mean? It continues to separate, and they're really it's just a continuation of that same colonization. Gentrification is colonization. You know what I'm saying?
Hey.
So,
yo, I think that's where we got to end it. I want to say thank you. It's a real honor to sit and talk with you.
It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, tons of respect. Check them out. Tufawon, water protector, hip-hop artist. Definitely somebody you should put into your headphones. Check out what he's got to say. Money, power, land, solidarity.
We need money, land, solidarity. If you're funny, stand very far away from me. We have running plans about as far as they can see to keep them coming. Bands building up the company. Shauna told me I was gonna be prosperous. I listen. I'm just praying, make a place a positive addition. Try to knock me off my spot would be preposterous. Y'all fishing in this bitch, illuminate like phosphorus. I glisten, gliding like a Christ on the water. Now you're Christian, sliding like I'm ice over top the opposition. Hold a vision in my mind and make it pop about fruition. Expanding these demands and will not crop the propositions. Shelter close food, guaranteed the whole mood. The rest, you're gonna inherit the earth that holds true. Culture, power grows, gonna deal 'em a